Hello, this is David Gottfried, and I'm now going to present to you my belief that feminism, unfortunately, often corrupts science. I'm not opposed to feminism, but I'm going to give you 6 examples of the feminist corruption of science. Um, don't get me wrong, I am all for science and reasoned skeptical study. But so many scholars, it seems, tell us that they want to tell us instead of telling us what is true and what the data indicates is true. Now, this transpires in many areas of so-called scholarly study, from the hard sciences to the social sciences. Okay, let me start with my 6 examples. Number 1, John Money of Johns Hopkins University. He held that sexual identification and behavior was solely a matter of environmental factors and social construction. Biology, he sagely pronounced, had nothing to do with it. Not too long, well, maybe 10 years ago, a book entitled As Nature Made Me recounted the experience of one of Money's patients. The boy endured a catastrophic circumcision shortly after birth. The penis was not salvageable. The boy was sent to Dr. Money of Johns Hopkins. Money and his satellite doctors elected to remove the remains of the penis, the testicles, shoot the boy up with female hormones, and raise the boy as a girl. The boy saw Dr. Money throughout his childhood. Dr. Money's scientific reports consistently said that the boy's sexual reassignment was going smoothly. His report said that the boy was doing very nicely as a young lady, and that this was consistent with his theory that sexual identification was totally a function of socialization. Tell a child that he is a girl who wants to wear dresses, and the child will be a girl who wants to wear dresses. In fact, from the very beginning, the boy felt that he was really more like a boy and despised all things feminine. He was aggressive, physical, and when he was in kindergarten, he beat up the other boys and girls and said that he wanted to be a garbage man when he grew up. They sent him to a female psychiatrist to buttress his assimilation into the female sex, but that didn't do anything. He was miserable, disgusted, and out of place. Perhaps Mr. Money was not interested in science. His reports were complete lies and shrouded the truth of the boy's bitter aggression under a pink canopy of lace and frills. Perhaps he was simply interested in propagating the notion that we are all very malleable, that sexual identification can be changed, and was merely an advocate for a feminist belief. Another point 2. Example 2, I should say. A few years ago, there was a show on that monstrosity called public television, which chronicled a family's efforts to live in a home in turn-of-the-century London. I guess it was sort of like what you would call an urbane reality show. In any event, a bunch of people were put in a home bereft of any of the conveniences which had been developed since the beginning of the 20th century. The title of the program might have been called 19th Century House. So basically, the show showed women scrubbing away without any modern conveniences, and the women were haggard, and the guys were shown smoking cigarettes. This show, in the vein of so much pseudo scholarship, felt free to editorialize and make sweeping generalizations on the basis of the women scrubbing floors. Their findings, not surprisingly, were that women were persecuted and abused by being compelled to do very arduous housework. However, the program was wholly oblivious to another area of life, namely work outside the home. Work outside of the home was usually performed by men, was extremely grueling, much more treacherous than housework. Men routinely died in mining disasters and sweated to death in polluted and filthy factories for very long hours and for very meager wages. But by only talking about work inside the home, the people who made this show were able to just give us another feminist screed. And because they're called scholars, a lot of people will believe this nonsense. Now, the greatest suffering, perhaps, was that borne by young boys. Young boys were used as chimney sweeps. Not all young boys, of course, only young boys who were poor people, who were from the working class. They would be sent, like Santas, down the tops of chimneys, all the way to the fireplace to brush and scrub every last crevice in the narrow, grimy corridor. This resulted in a very high incidence of scrotal cancer among young boys, because when a young boy is submerged in coal dust, it's toxic to the scrotum and the testicles. Indeed, the number of ailing boys with malignant genitals became so high that one of the first sorts of occupational cancer risks known to scientists was the risk of scrotal cancer to young boys who worked as chimney sweeps. This was written up, a report of this problem was written up in England sometime in the latter part of the 18th century. If I remember correctly, it was something like the 1770s. Take it again, if you will. Young boys suffered from a high incidence of scrotal cancer in the England of Charles Dickens because so many of them were compelled to crawl down chimneys. So much for the idea that women have always worked and suffered the hardest. But the truth is obscured when the political ruling class is biased against men and is so ardently, belligerently feminist. I shouldn't say the political ruling class. I guess I should say there are different sectors of ruling power. and I would say the ruling class in Boston and New York is infatuated with that sort of feminism. And most people are fooled and conned. They are watching the trite programs on public television, and they actually, I think, believe a lot of this stuff. Another example, I recently read an article in the New York Times which cited a study which the Times told us seemed to prove that single people were healthier than married people. Apparently, the study asked people what physical aberrations or illnesses they had, and apparently married people reported more illnesses. What rubbish! Perhaps married people reported more ailments, not because they were sicker, but because their caring and devoted spouses observed these aberrations and insisted that they go to the doctor. But the Times did not have any sense to say this. Also, the article in the Times did not have the sense to remind us that single people die sooner than married people. Perhaps the article was written this way because they wanted to buttress feminism by telling us that being single is fine and dandy, which of course has often been a cardinal point of feminism. Number 4, some medical journals have published articles commending all manner of psychotropic medications to children. Some of these articles are written by doctors who receive hundreds of thousands of dollars from pharmaceutical companies. The primary target of these drugs is young boys. Masculine behavior is unpopular with the harridans who run our classrooms, and if necessary, little boys are given drugs which, in their dephysicalizing attributes, seem almost tantamount to chemical castration. Maybe that's very hyperbolic, but hey, the feminists are very hyperbolic, so what goes around comes around. Number 5, we are ignoring the feminization of the world by environmental toxins. Transgenderism is becoming more prevalent, or at the very least being given more attention. I think science, perhaps because of a certain hostility to maleness, which seems to suffuse all of academia, may be deliberately overlooking the extent to which environmental pollutants might be effeminizing men. Part of the problem stems from women birth control pills. They contain estrogen and or derivatives of estrogen. The consumption of these pills by millions of women has pumped substantial amounts of estrogen into the environment. You know, these women will eventually go to the bathroom. Also, some scientists have said that some pesticides have estrogen-like properties. The ubiquitous increase in estrogen levels and the pesticides may be responsible for more transgenderism, lower sperm counts, lower levels of testosterone, and what appears to be an increase in gynecomastia, in layman's terms, man tits. But combating the feminization of men isn't exactly chic. or in sync with the political goals of the feminists and their slavish male stooges. And so what I'm telling you is just, for the most part, ignored. Number example 6, ACT UP was a fine organization which boldly and robustly fought AIDS. However, it had its weaknesses. One of them was the common gay tendency to be too solicitous and deferential to women. I was affiliated with ACT UP in 92 and sporadically involved before and after 1992. I remember from meetings in 1992 that ACT UP argued emphatically that it was imperative to assess the impact of HIV on women's health and to do more for women's gynecological problems. At that time, the overwhelming majority of AIDS patients in the United States were male. Nevertheless, ACT UP did not think it proper to establish a committee to assess the effects of HIV on men's health, perhaps believing that such a thing would smack of male privilege or some other such related nonsense. Actually, and this is another example of, I think, what Camille Paglia brilliantly called in one of her first published works, the gay male tendency to worship certain women as a bitchy goddess. Actually, I remember, this is amazing, that in the fall of 1984 or 1985, in a meeting of the Coalition for Lesbian and Gay Rights held in New York City, a gay man opposed doing more to fight AIDS, because he reasoned that since AIDS primarily afflicted men, he reasoned that fighting AIDS was too sexist and too male. I mean, this is an example of what I'm talking about. But thank God he was shouted down. Incidentally, he was shouted down not by a man, but by a good, tough lesbian. So sometimes I like tough ladies. All right, take care. And that's the conclusion of my essay. Goodbye.